Hi there, my name is Laura Milner, and I'm the very proud Dean of the College of Business Administration. On behalf of the faculty, the Board of Advisors, and the Student Finance Club, it's my pleasure to welcome you here to the fourth year of our First Friday series. I'm excited to announce that this year we have a new sponsor, and it's Benson Management. And we have the pleasure of having Barbara Benson here, if you would, so we could thank you, if you would stand up, so we can thank you for being our sponsor this year. So if you don't know, every year we showcase 3 exceptional graduates, of which all of you will become one of them. You will all become exceptional, as all our graduates are. And we have this First Friday speaker series about 3 times a year. Just to let you know, so Todd Koss, who is our speaker for today, he serves as the CEO of Grande Cheese with its home office located in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and manufacturing distribution facilities in 6 additional locations throughout the state. He has served as Chief Financial Officer for 10 years before stepping into this role in 2016. He earned a bachelor's degree in business from UWL and an MBA from University of Wisconsin-Madison. He previously worked in the banking industry and at Procter & Gamble in various leadership positions before joining Grande. He's been active in the community, serving at UWL Fond du Lac Foundation Board. He's also been at University of Wisconsin College of Business Administration Board of Advisors, so he's been with us before. And he's also on the Fond du Lac County Economic Development Board. I want you to know that last fall, a lot of the faculty and I went to visit Todd at Grande Cheese. And I got to admit, it was a chill vibe like you wouldn't believe. We loved it. We didn't want to leave. And actually, it was one of the more interesting visits we've ever had because we partied down in the basement because they were having a tornado drill because tornadoes were in the area. So we all had to go down to the shelter. So we partied down there, and I figure if you can throw a good party in a basement during a tornado, you can really do better in other circumstances. So be aware that Grande Cheese is a wholesale cheese, a wholesale company. So I'm so delighted to have you hear more from Todd about the cheese you've never heard of, the very best cheese you've never heard of, because it's so good. We got to eat some last week, as well as his own stellar career. Let me introduce CBA's own Todd Koss. So.
Thank you, Dean Milner. I assume everyone can hear me okay? Great. First of all, again, thanks for having me here. Also want to thank Benson Management for sponsoring this. That's great to have such sponsorship for events like this. I want to gauge a little bit who's in the crowd. So how many finance majors? Wow, okay. I don't think we had that many when I was here. Other majors? Quite a few. Business, mostly, of some kind? Okay, great. Other guests? Faculty? And others? Okay. Okay, nice mix. So, when I was asked to speak and given a little bit of a gauge as to what the audience would be, so a lot of my comments are tailored a little bit more to finance majors, but a lot of it applies to just about anyone who is a college student. I was thinking, how do I do this? He said, well, the idea is give people a little taste of your career, how you got to where you came to, where you came from, where you're going to, a little bit about Grande, and I wasn't sure how to do that. So I started putting together this chronology. You sit back and you think about your career, which in my case has gone on for a little while now. And I had a eureka moment because during the chronicling of my career, I realized there were certain seminal moments that changed everything, where things pivoted. It could have been a decision made, it could have been an opportunity realized, but those really did change, and there weren't all that many of them. So I'm going to focus on those today. Now, it says life's seminal moments. I'll be the first to admit this is career-focused and business-focused, okay? So my wife, who's sitting over in the corner, will be the first to tell you that the most seminal moment should be our marriage, right? And I admit that, dear, yes. And birth of the kids come close behind that. But this is focused on, again, career management. So, we'll get started. You know, it started off, I'd call it humble origins. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. I would say we were solidly middle class. I'm from the area, grew up about 20 miles outside of town, right between Holman and Mindoro. How many people know where that is? Okay, quite a few. So, grew up in the country. My father was a purchasing agent for a wholesale building supply company, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. So we had a pretty traditional upbringing. You know, we're never hungry or anything like that, but you did have to earn your own spending money if you wanted a car or to go out on the weekends. Went to Melrose Mindoro High School, graduated in 1983. I know I'm dating myself a little bit there, but was fairly active. So I cared about studies, was an honor student. I participated in sports, football, basketball, and track, and also acted in enough school plays to become a member of the Thespian Guild. You had to in a small high school. I had 65 in my graduating class. So everybody had to be active. Otherwise, you wouldn't have enough for those activities. So they accepted even somebody like me. And I started working early. Remember I said that if you wanted spending money, you had to earn it. So basically, after my 7th grade, that summer, I started working. You know, and forget child labor laws here, okay? I started working for a commercial window cleaning business in Winona, Minnesota. My oldest brother actually just purchased that business, and he was operating it. And actually, his daughter is in the audience tonight as well, who attended UWL. So I worked for him basically summers, weekends, holidays, whenever you could, right, to earn a little extra money. And later on, I did the same thing because I had an uncle who owned the same business in Rochester. So I'd cart myself up to Rochester, or somebody would take me, and I'd work there. So that was spending money pretty much throughout high school and actually into college. College years. So I started in 1983. I was a physics major first semester. So how many students have switched majors at least once? Okay, we're all together, right? That happens more often than not. I thought, ooh, nuclear physics, that's got to be where it's at. I'm going to make a ton of money. And I realized I don't really like physics all that much, with all deference to it as a major, right? And so I still liked math, I just didn't like the way physics applied it. So I switched to a finance major in business school after my first semester here. And I'll spend a little time because that's the first time there was a seminal moment. Switching majors and finding the right one for me. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought, okay, business, that's great. But within business, what kind of major? Could have been marketing, could have been economics, finance, accounting, you name it. So I didn't know what to do, and I had a networking opportunity. And one of the messages tonight is networking is important. And it can come from anywhere. It can come from acquaintances, family, you name it. In this case, it was family. Does anyone remember the name Heilemann Brewery Company? See some nods of heads, okay, right? Big presence here a long time ago now. My great aunt had worked there for 45 years. She was actually the CEO's assistant. And she said, I was speaking with her at a holiday event, family event, and she said, I understand you're struggling. I think I can help. I'll sit you down with the chief operating officer of the company. And if you're interested in his advice, maybe he can help. So I took that, right? Wow. chief operating officer of a big company like Heilman was at that time. And so I explained my issue, not sure what to do. And he said, well, what are you thinking of? Well, I'm thinking about marketing. Because I don't know, it just seems like a good thing to do. And he said, well, do you really want my opinion? And I said, yes. And he didn't hesitate. He said, finance or accounting? See a few smiles out there, must be the finance majors. He said, what do you want to do with your career? And I said, well, someday I want to get into senior management. And he said, if you don't understand the numbers, you won't be credible as a leader. And if you haven't had training and understanding the financials of a business, it's the hardest thing to learn after you're out of school. Now, that's with all deference to the other majors. I know some marketing people would say, I could learn finance in a minute. But for me, it was the right decision. And that was incredible advice for me. And I stayed to that pretty much throughout my educational career, as you'll see. So again, great opportunity, realize it when it happens. Then while I was in a finance major, I was a couple of years in, I was approached by Dr. Colclaw, Bill Colclaw. Did he make it tonight? Bill, are you? Thanks for coming. So I was still basically a kid from the backwoods, right? Still wearing jeans and flannel shirts, taking my finance classes, washing windows. And he approached me and said, hey, I know about a part-time job that's open at a bank here in town. Would you be interested? Because if you are, I'll help you get set up with an interview. Sure. Why not? And so I ended up going to Norwest, which is now Wells Fargo downtown. I imagine most people know where that is. And I ended up working through the rest of college, working for the bank. It was an interesting job. Thanks, Bill, by the way. It was an interesting job. It was consumer loan collections. So you collected on people who were delinquent on their car loans. So guess what I got to do? I got to repossess cars, microwaves, motorcycles, semi-trailers, trucks, Jeeps, tractors, mobile home houses. It was interesting. Hey, but it paid the rent. It paid the rent and it paid tuition. Every once in a while, I would still wash windows, and I even stacked lumber every once in a while for a neighbor of my parents for a little cash on Sunday afternoons. It was basically anything to pay my way through school. So I graduated in '87. So I took 4.5 years, because by that time, I was actually at the bank working well over half-time. I was probably working about 30 hours a week and fitting in classes around the work schedule. I did pretty well, so I graduated with highest honors. And I did pay for college and living expenses from my jobs. Of course, supplemented with student loans, so yes, I had my healthy share of student loans at the time. So I got out of school and started in a banking career. I already was in banking, essentially. It just meant that, thank God, I'd go from 30 to maybe 40 to 50 hours a week, and I don't have to study anymore. That's nice. So I was working for Norwest, basically doing the same thing. By the time I had graduated, I was actually the most senior person in that department. Turnover tended to be pretty high. So I did that for 2 more years. And of course, by that time, I'm looking for something better. Want to move up, right? Like anyone does in an organization. But at that time, in the bank I was at, a lot of entrenched people, they had been there a long time. It was going to be hard for me to move up within the organization. And at that time, HR really wasn't developed all that well. And so it was hard to move, say, out of the branch here into another branch in another city. It just, frankly, didn't happen all that much. So I'd done pretty well here at the time when I was the senior person. So kind of pseudo running the department. By the time I left, we had achieved the lowest delinquency rate in 20 years. Actually, we had the president of the bank tell us, we're actually taking more chances lending money because we know you folks are going to be on top of it. I don't know how to feel about that, right? Because it meant more work. But they were doing it because they could manage the portfolio that way. And we collected a lot of charged off bad debt too. So bad debt, right? Certainly finance majors know what that is. You deem you can't collect it anymore, and you write it off the books. Well, years later, we'd pop up and we'd collect some of that stuff. It's one of my favorite things to do, actually. But in 20 years, we were able to achieve the best rates ever there. Then another networking opportunity happened. Again, I was starting to look around, thinking about other opportunities that might be there. And at a local car show down at the convention center here, I ran into somebody. He was the vice president of retail banking from First Bank System. Now it's US Bank downtown. And I didn't really think anything of it except that, oh, he's the vice president, I better behave myself. And we had a nice conversation about banking, about what was going on in the industry. Nice conversation. A month later, I got a phone call from the guy at work. And he said, I need a head of consumer lending, kind of a senior lending person at First Bank. I'd like you to come and speak to me about it. So again, the power of networking, right? It was just a local car show and an informal chat. And it led to a job offer. So I took that job, moved to First Bank System. By the way, for those of you who may leave one employer for another employer that's a competitor, fair warning, chances are you're going to get escorted out of the office, okay, the same day. Because you'll give your two-week notice. And they said, well, you know you're going to the competition. And they were nice about it, but they said, we've got to have you leave now. That was a little bit of a shock for your first transition into a new job, but it can happen, right? So I went into First Bank System, was heading up the senior person in consumer, and I did a lot of small business lending, real small businesses, and did that for a couple of years. And again, I developed a pretty good track record. I actually had the largest portfolio amongst retail lenders in the Midwest region for First Bank System. So I thought, I've done well enough here. I've been here a couple of years. Maybe I can leverage that. It's time to get out of branch banking now. I want to get into corporate finance. I want to get into a corporate office. Maybe get into big company lending. So another seminal moment. So I got, since my record was pretty good, I was able to arrange a discussion with the VP of HR at that time at First Bank System up in Minneapolis. And she had an interesting message. Now remember, this is the early 90s yet, so MBAs were considered all powerful, right? And so she said, hey, you've got a great record. You could have a great career in branch banking. But to get into corporate, you got to have the pedigree. We won't look at you without an MBA. Don't have a shot. It's just a requirement, base requirement. So I said, okay, I'm going to get an MBA. If that's what you want, that's what I'll give you. So I began applying at graduate schools. I ended up applying at 4. And I had targeted 3 Big Ten schools and then one that was sort of a long shot, something totally out of the box and out of my comfort zone. I applied at, of course, UW-Madison, at Minnesota. Wisconsin people, don't boo me for that, okay? Northwestern and Stanford. I got accepted at all of them except for Northwestern. I hold a grudge against them to this day for that. And Stanford, it was a long shot. I got an offer for a fellowship, but it wasn't a full fellowship. And even a nice fellowship from Stanford for a working schmuck like me with, maybe a couple hundred savings in the bank. Wasn't going to happen. It just wasn't. So I was planning to go to Minnesota, believe it or not, because both bank systems that I had worked for, at that time Norwest and First Bank System, they were both headquartered in Minneapolis. So I had contacts up there, right? I could get a part-time job. I could work my way through like I had before. And that's where I was planning to go, and I got a phone call. Seminal moment. At that time, I'm pretty sure Dr. Jim Johannes was the chair of the finance department. If not chair of the finance department, he was at least chair of the banking portion of the finance department at Madison. And he invited me down, and he said, hey, I'd love for you to see the campus. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool, right? I'm getting a phone call, and I like Madison. I'd been there before, almost as good as La Crosse when it comes to bars, right? So I'll visit State Street, no problem. So I came down, we toured the campus, and at the end of the tour, we were in his office, and he said, well, how'd you like campus? It's great. And he said, I'd like to offer you a fellowship. Full ride, including living expenses, everything. We'll even cut your rent check every month. Well, for me, the eyes got big, stammered a little bit, right? And that kind of sealed the deal. So I ended up entering the MBA program. Now understand that back then, all they had was a 2-year program. They didn't have kind of an official part-time program. You could go part-time, but they didn't have special evening classes or anything like that. They didn't have the executive MBA programs that are pretty prevalent nowadays. None of that. So if you were going for the full boat, traditional 2-year MBA program. I had my fellowship for the first year, and so actually it was the first time I'd ever gone to school since 7th grade that I didn't have to work. It was really nice. I could play basketball, I could do all kinds of stuff. I was still a finance major because at that time, I knew that if I kept a finance major, the MBA would give me other training, right? Because I had gotten marketing classes and other business classes in undergrad, and I'd get more of that as an MBA, but I still wanted finance to be my foundation. And I knew I would learn just enough accounting to be dangerous, which is probably about all I wanted. Again, apologies to accounting majors, but I wanted to know just enough. And after my first year, this is one of a life seminal moment, not career related. My dear fiance at that time said, hey, I'm getting sick of this long-term relationship. She was still here, and said, what are we going to do about that? And I said, well, let's get married. So we did. So we got married in the summer of '92, and during the course of that time, I finished from '92 to '95 part-time. I had an old buddy of mine from La Crosse who became a senior commercial lender at an independent bank in Madison called Park Bank. I gave him a call. We had worked together. He knew my work. I knew what he was about. So I got a job working for him pretty quickly. And again, the next 3 years finished up. And by the way, we had one child going in and had our second one along the course of those 3 years. So you can think about both of us working, I'm going to grad school, having kids. So believe me, when somebody says, well, now it's just not the right time to get my MBA, there is no good time, okay? Just do it. Just get it done, because there will never be a good time. So I'm finishing up here, and again, a big decision, seminal moment came. By then, I'd been almost 9 years in banking, if you include undergrad experience. And it was just as important as banking is in the intermediary function it plays, right, in the economy. I felt it to be limiting. I wanted to work for a company that made something tangible. But there was risk in that, right? because banking experience doesn't necessarily always translate into another company's desires and what they're looking for in a background. So I knew there's a chance that I'd have to start over a little bit. And by then, I was doing pretty well at Park Bank. I had a portfolio. I controlled 10% of the bank's assets in my personal portfolio. I was a senior lender, had a nice title, all this good stuff, right? I'm on the senior credit officers committee, had a lot of responsibility, even had my own assistant. Oh my gosh, right? But I decided to switch. So as I finished up my MBA, I started participating in the recruiting process. Madison, of course, like many schools in the UW system, has a very robust recruiting process, facilitation process. So I was going through that. Did pretty well. I had 3 or 4 offers under my belt. Felt pretty good about that. My wife felt pretty good about that. And this company called Procter & Gamble was coming. And of course, most people know Procter & Gamble, right? Tide, Crest, Pampers. I mean, you name most of the big brands, it seems like they make them. And they were recruiting at UW-Madison, and I signed up for the interview process like I had for all the others. But they had a very interesting requirement for the interview. You had to take a test to interview with them. The test was one they administered globally to all business hires, potential hires and candidates, and it tested your critical thinking. You had to do math. It was sort of like a mini ACT. So those of you who remember how much fun that was, right? And I thought, I'm not taking this. Who do they think they are, right? I'm not some kid fresh out of undergrad who's never had work experience. I'm a senior vice president. I control portfolio. I have all this stuff. I'm not going to take some stupid test. So I literally went into the career office. And the MBA advisor at that time, Ted Boris, last I heard, I think, if he hasn't retired, he's heading up the MBA program at Arizona State. And I had gotten to know him pretty well because I was a little older than your traditional MBA student at that time. He came out and he said, "Hey, Todd, what's going on?" I said, "Oh, I'm just canceling an interview." He said, Who with? Procter & Gamble. Are you sure? I mean, pretty good company. I said, I'm not taking some test. Forget it, Ted. And he looked at me and he said, "Would you just get off the horse? You're good, but you're not that good." He said, "Just have a little humility, okay? Take the test." Okay, Ted was a good guy. I trusted him. I took the test. And guess what happened? Pivot. Big pivot to Procter & Gamble. So lesson there, right? Have a little humility. Nobody's that good. Sometimes it's okay to do something that seems silly if it achieves what you want. So I spent 5 years at Procter & Gamble. Did some pretty cool things. I was in their accelerated development program. That meant you switched assignments roughly every 2 years. Very robust development program that they'd been doing for a long time. They did it like nobody else could. And you learned a lot. I started off in global treasury, right? Banker. Global treasury, kind of a sexy job. Got to do some cool things there. Latin America finance. We were always acquiring companies down in Latin America, small ones, snapping them up, eating them like peanuts, it seemed like. And I'd work with our international tax department and structure, well, where should the assets go? What entities should own what entities? And make sure that we're as tax effective as possible for that. Also looked at other financing opportunities, did a pretty cool deal involving preferred stock exchange between us and a UK subsidiary. Global cash and debt reporting, amazing even at a big company like Procter. Again, remember this is 20-some years ago now. It was amazing their reporting systems weren't all that great for global cash and debt. I once had $500 million on a spreadsheet just because I was creative. Now, that's not fraudulent. It was you're rolling up numbers, and you always have an other because not everything adds up all the time. And my boss said, that's too big. Get rid of it's .8 billion. They won't ask anything if it's 300 billion, so get rid of half a billion. So I did. So that was pretty fun. Really cool group, a lot of cool stuff. I'm working with investment bankers, all this. Things are going great. But my 2 years are up. What do I do next? I had a couple of interesting internal offers from people that wanted me to come and work for them. And this one's another seminal moment because I sat back and looked at my profile. It was time to sit back and say, what do you really want to do with your career, Todd? And if the idea was still senior management in a company like this, I had a glaring hole. I was a staffer. I had never done anything except finance. And finance is a staff position, right? Corporate staff, HR, IT, finance and accounting. I had to get my hands dirty or I'd never be credible in a company like this or any company like this. So I'd always been fascinated by business when I was a lender and dealt with a lot of businesses, including startup businesses. And so I decided I need to crawl around the guts of a plant for a while. I opened a few eyes at Procter, including my mentor and my boss, when I said, yeah, I want a plant assignment. So we moved from Cincinnati to North Carolina, Greensboro, North Carolina. And I spent 2 years crawling around a plant. Very, very different. 1 minute you're dealing with billions of dollars on reporting systems. The next minute you're worrying about how many hair nets the associates are using in the packing line. But I would say they were probably the 2 least fun years that I had, but they were 2 of the most valuable I ever had as far as my career management. So I managed cost of production for Crest and Fixodent at that plant. They made all those products for all of North America, including Canada and Mexico at that time. And I also managed the site-wide capital accounting group. Remember I said I had just enough accounting to be dangerous? Well, they gave me capital accounting, and I was dangerous. We did one pretty cool project there. Our production system was not benchmarked globally. We consistently were getting shown up by the Germans. And so what do you do when you're getting beat? You get competitive. You fly over there, find out what they're doing. And they had a totally different configuration for their production system. We ended up financially justifying on cost savings basis an enormous investment in the North America site at Greensboro, ripping out that entire existing system and putting in a new one. Believe me, that's a big deal. Ripping out existing assets in a production system for manufacture, it takes quite a bit of justification. So that was pretty good stuff. But also, it was one of the more difficult times because it was during this time that in the US, Crest lost market share to Colgate, and that had never happened before. So that was a big deal. Before I came in, Crest was Fixodent was smaller, so Crest was huge, billion-dollar brand, margins are fat. The message to me was at that time when I first came in, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat. Here's your buckets of money. Just tend to manage your buckets of money at about, so much. As long as they don't really vary too much, you're good. You don't have to know the details. That was wrong. That was wrong. Because when the business got into crisis mode and the brand manager of Crest, who's a pretty powerful individual, says we need a war chest because we're going after Colgate big time, they're running up and down the P&L looking for money. And it's not okay to say, well, I've got this bucket. I don't really know what's in it, but I know it tends to come out at about this level. That wasn't good enough. That was a key lesson. You know, just because somebody tells you don't rock the boat and you don't need to know the details. When you went there to learn details, don't accept that. Don't. I spent a lot of long hours, as my wife will attest to, generally 7 days a week learning the details until my assignment was done. And by the time I was done, myself and the site-wide capital accounting group were actually the resource for the entire healthcare business unit globally because we learned it so well. So that filled in that hole. Next assignment, North American Hair Care Finance. You can see I was essentially, if you're the brand finance manager for any brand, you're essentially the CFO of that business, working with the brand manager. So brand manager's the CEO. I was CFO of the Pert Plus business. People know Pert Plus? Raise your hands. Pert Plus, 2-in-1. Spend 3 hours losing your hair and 90 seconds getting it back if you're an athlete. Sorry, can't help myself. I also led hair care competitive intelligence efforts. That was kind of fun, poking your nose in on competition, seeing what they're doing, and then what will we do to them in response. Also kind of a cool thing here, led the brand essence process for all care brands. At that time, Procter was very interested in licensing opportunities. They had some of the best brands in the world, and they were thinking, well, gee, rather than just make products and sell them, we could license these for more products if the brand is powerful enough. So, for instance, at that time, Physique was a hair care brand, and their brand essence was, well, their brand message was science doing for your hair what nature didn't. And we said, well, if you strip that down and take the product away, the essence of it is science providing what nature didn't. Boy, you could use that anywhere, right? You could use that in fitness equipment. You know, maybe you're born flabby, but the fitness equipment and science will build you up, or whatever it may be. So it was fun stuff. Love the company, love the development. There's only one problem. My wife and I are from Wisconsin. Our parents were here in Wisconsin. Most of our siblings were here in Wisconsin. So the kids start getting to a certain age. You don't see grandpa and grandma all that much. And you make a choice. And in this case, lesson here, seminal moment, we decided that we were going to look for opportunities to return to Wisconsin. Most career choices need to reconcile with your life choices, personal life, because there will always be an impact, always. And make sure the two are in alignment, okay? So we did. Put my resume out there. Took about 18 months. And I heard about this company called Grande cheese. First time I heard of it, I went, Grande? No, it's Grande. Grande cheese. And I thought, oh, I'm never going to hear the end of it. I'm in hair care, you know, all of this cool stuff going on, global brands, and I'm going to work for a cheese company in Wisconsin. But what the heck, I'll look into it. It's worth a try. So I started having discussions with them. And I learned some interesting things about Grande cheese. Similar in basics of culture to P&G. P&G was famous. There have been books written about their culture that it's almost cult-like. That you had this great feeling of being part of something bigger. And there was immense pride in that. Well, I found that at Grande too. As a matter of fact, that's one of the most foundational elements of our mission and culture statement is that we are part of a greater purpose. A purpose greater than ourselves. And that resonated with me. There were some other things. Grande cheese, as I learned about them, never heard of them. Most of you probably never heard of Grande, except maybe through school here where we've had contacts, right? And anyway, in the industry, in food service, even the restaurant operators that don't use us acknowledge that we're the best. That was attractive. Unwavering commitment to quality. Well, I was used to that. That resonated. The other thing was they were offering me an opportunity when I came up. They said, we're looking for a director of strategic planning. Never existed in the company before. We're a mid-sized company that had been run more like a small company. A lot of informal decision making, a lot of informal knowledge, no strategic planning process. We've got a budgeting process that takes 6 months and then we ditch it for 1 month into the new year. And so we need somebody to help us. Well, that was kind of interesting, but they said, by the way, our CFO is going to be retiring in about 5 years. You help build this organization, you take it over. Well, that was attractive because by now I'd have enough varied experiences. I thought, wow, this is the opportunity to build a finance organization the way I see it. I can blend in banking, what I've learned during Procter & Gamble years. I can blend all that together in something that would truly be an impact on an organization that would be mine, my creation. That was enormously attractive, but it didn't exist. Roll up your sleeves. How many of the finance majors remember old-fashioned payback period? They still teach that? I see nods, okay. When I came to Grande, they were still using that. Even when I was in school in 1983, they had pretty much discounted that as, a really viable measure in favor of the good old NPV, right, IRR, all that good stuff. And so I had to build the first models. I had to create them out of spreadsheets. I had to create the strategic planning spreadsheets myself. I had to do all that. I had to write the financial analysis standards because there weren't any. Everybody was doing their own thing. So it was truly roll up your sleeves time, but at the same time, it was mine. And then you began training people. You began developing people within the organization or bringing in new ones who got what you were trying to teach. So again, a little bit of ambiguity there, but boy, never pass up a chance to build something like that. That was some of the most enriching work I've ever done. Strategic planning, we built and directed the enterprise strategic planning process. Again, wrote and then oversaw financial analytics after training an organization how to perform financial analytics, and eventually expanded really to oversee all the finance areas except treasury and corporate accounting. They were under different directors at that time. Again, developed that. I actually got sucked into, and I don't know how that happened, but I got pulled into designing executive compensation systems even though I wasn't executive. So I spent a lot of time designing great compensation systems for a rank of individuals that I wasn't yet. But I thought maybe someday, okay? So I designed them really well. And by the way, when I turned 40, I paid off my last student loans because I had to borrow money to finish up MBA school too. So, message there. There's been a lot of press about student loan debt and things of that nature. It took me till I was 40, and I was glad to do it. It was the right investment, I think. So, became Chief Financial Officer then after roughly 5 years. Directed all finance and accounting. Eventually, that incorporated IT as well. Brought that into the fold under my management. Directed the first ERP implementation. That was interesting and painful, but successful. Also led the development of a business intelligence group where, there's data and then there's information. And we developed an enterprise centralized group that really specialized in developing business intelligence. And that's still going on today. But then I'd been Chief Financial Officer for almost 10 years. I was approaching that age where you begin to think, what should I do now? Things are great. I like it here. I've been able to build an organization. It's kind of functioning the way I'd like to. but I don't feel I'm done yet. So you face that moment again. Do I stay or do I go? And I actually had some discussions with other companies because I wasn't sure that there would be an opportunity at Grande. My predecessor as CEO, he was due to retire in a couple of years. I knew that, at least generally. But I also knew I couldn't wait forever. And I stepped back and I looked at that, and I had a couple of very important advisors / friends who said, Todd, think about the company. Think about the basics. Think about what it stands for. Are you willing to give that up for an immediate shot when you still have a shot here at advancing? And that was great advice. And I decided to be a patient for another year or two. Well, obviously it paid off, right? So I became CEO. I've been in the role for about 3 years now. When I ascended, the company had reached a certain plateau of achievement and in our business model, and the chairman said, we want to get to the next level. It's time for us to take that next step. And in preparation for that, ended up overhauling quite a bit of the executive and senior management team. We either promoted from within or we brought in outside talent because I was organizing a structure that could achieve the next 10 years. Because we do have a 10-year plan. And we march towards that. That's one of the advantages of a private company. You can think long-term like that and have some patience. We put in, remember I talked about Procter & Gamble and the development? That became enormously important to me. I was a huge disciple of that. And when I was as CFO, I'd put it in for the finance and accounting department and then for IT. But we really hadn't adopted that kind of a system across all Grande. Well, guess what happened? As soon as I became CEO, we put it in across the company. We'll talk a little bit about that at the close. And then also, almost the first thing I did was the conversation I mentioned with the chairman. In order to achieve the next 10 years, you had to have a document, right? So we constructed a document called The Journey. Now, this document had existed before in an earlier form, but is in way, way past due. It was probably 7, 8 years overdue for an update. And it included a detailed description of our mission and culture statements. It basically said, why do we say what we do? And that was authored by the chairman. But then there was something called the Enterprise Charter. And in short, it's what we are not, and what we strive to be. What we strive to be, well, what we are and what we are not sets the parameters for us as an enterprise. There are certain things that we're about, and there are certain things that we're not. What we strive to be was the 10-year visionary level plan. Pretty cool stuff to, set the direction for the organization for the next decade. So, enough about me. With that, I have to put in a shameless plug for Grande Cheese Company for all of these students who may want to come and work for us. So we've got a video that kind of introduces Grande to the public.
Over 75 years ago, Filippo Candela left Montelepre, Sicily for America with hopes of making a better life. He arrived in Wisconsin by train late in the winter of 1940. Not knowing where he'd be sleeping and only able to speak a few words of English. After a short time in Wisconsin, Filippo met an Italian cheese buyer he'd been friends with in the old world. It was through this friendship and a handful of family and friends that a new cheese company was formed. They named this company Grande, meaning greatness in Italian. In the early years, Grande primarily made Italian eating and grating cheeses, such as provolone and romano. In the 1950s, pizza became popular, and Grande began to produce our trademarked mozzarella. This product soon became recognized in fine Italian restaurants and pizzerias as the most exceptional of cheeses for pizza. The unique taste of Grande's cheeses came from Filippo's unswerving passion for excellence. And this passion for excellence is the foundation of Grande's mission and culture.
There's a respect that comes that you get by working at a company like Grande. And we earn that through professionalism. And that's through acting in an ethical manner. That's by living up to the expectations that we set. It's following up. When you say you're going to do something, you do it. Basically, you walk the talk. At Grande, we're held to a standard of excellence. And if we say we're going to do something, if we commit, we fulfill the commitments that we make to our operators and to our distributors and to our business associates.
Today, Grande has 7 facilities, and our associates share a passion for crafting fine Italian cheeses and value-added whey products. It all starts with the milk procured by our dedicated dairy producers. The producers' passion includes ensuring the cows are comfortable so they can produce high-quality milk that meets and exceeds the nation's averages. The milk is then delivered to our cheese and whey-making facilities. Grande's authorized distributors then ship our cheese products to pizzeria and Italian restaurants across the United States. Pizzeria and Italian restaurant owners rely on our sales associates and Grande cheese for their authentic, differentiated flavor and their consistent performance.
We're an independent company, family-owned. It's all from the heart. How good can we make it? That's the big difference between Grande and other companies today.
Patrons can rely on these restaurants to provide the same great taste on their pizzas and other dishes each and every time they visit. And our whey products are shipped to food manufacturers across the world. Consumers are then able to enjoy products that help to improve flavor and nutrition. Grande and our associates have great pride in the quality products we craft, but it doesn't stop there. Grande associates are very involved in our communities. Grande actively supports Relay for Life, with teams participating and even selling pizza at these events and donating the profits back to those organizations. Many Grande teams participate in Big Brothers, Big Sisters annual bowl-a-thon. You'll also see Grande associates involved in many other local organizations. Grande associates have great pride in giving back to their individual communities, so you may see them helping at schools or churches, animal shelters or city organizations, and many more. Our journey into the future remains grounded in the spirit and intent of Grande's mission and culture. As associates of today build upon the efforts of those who preceded us, it is our responsibility to continue building for future generations. The investments made in the distribution center and home office provide tangible new examples of Grande's commitment to a common purpose and our shared values. Our challenge is to leverage these new assets into exciting and innovative approaches that improve both our and our constituents' businesses. Done properly, we will each contribute our own fingerprints in strengthening the financial security of all dedicated associates, while simultaneously achieving the most profound mandate of our culture, the fulfillment of a purpose greater than ourselves.
So, after a little bit, learning a little bit about Grande, so how did A Journey, which was the title of this presentation, which would be, I guess, Todd Koss's journey, how did that converge with the journey of Grande Cheese Company? How did this happen? You know, and this is lessons for everyone as you look for a company to work for. The basics count. Basics have to be there or the rest doesn't matter. What are the basics? You know, in this case for me, strong brand. I had never worked for a company that didn't have a strong brand. Even the banking companies, right, had a strong brand in their industry. World-class products. I never worked for a company that said it was okay to make products just good enough. No, I mean, a passion for excellence runs deep, and you know, you have to find those environments that are conducive to what you want to do. Passion for customers, so very customer oriented. Dedication to mission culture, you heard a little bit about that as well during the video. I spoke earlier about the feeling of being a part of something special, a greater purpose. You know, that is important to me, and I think it's important to many people, but sometimes you have to really search to find the environment or a company that truly believes in that and lives it. The chance, again, to build something to base on the sum total of experience and beliefs. So I had the ability to do that, and I lucked into a company that needed what I had to offer at that moment in time. Had to start with rolling up the sleeves, again, to build the foundation. Had to get a little dirty. Had to build it from the ground up. It wasn't just coming in and taking over what was already there. And at this point, really, I'm enjoying every day. I get to indulge my passions that I have now as a professional. Setting long-term direction of an organization, you know, creating the structure within the enterprise to achieve it, focusing on development of best-in-class professionals. I probably spend most of my time on development, whether it's succession planning, whether development and mentoring, things of that nature of some of the younger associates in the company. I spend more time on that individual item than any other items as CEO. And it's certainly a passion of mine. And just having a significant impact on associates and families' lives. I mean, you can never forget that. We have over 1,000 associates in our company and their families. And, you know, you take that responsibility extremely seriously, and you take great pride in the fact that our company is providing financial security for them and their families. So to conclude, key takeaways from other things that I've already said throughout the presentation. It can happen. You know, again, backwoods boy, right? Grew up just outside of town. There are times when my wife and I are sitting, when's the last time we did it? Denver, maybe? We're sitting in Mike Shanahan's steakhouse. Mike Shanahan, right? Very famous NFL coach. Sitting in a kind of a world famous steakhouse, and all of a sudden you look around and we look at each other and say, how did this happen anyway? How do we ever get here? But it can. It can happen. And never forget that. You own your career. I think you've heard throughout this presentation that there were many times that I had to make decisions about my career that sometimes were a little ambiguous, wasn't sure where to go, but you've got to make those decisions, and you own it. Nobody else does. Nobody can give that to you. And if you own it, you'll be much better off than if you kind of let it happen. Development. Development is everything. You've got to look for employers who focus on that. Not only say they focus, oh, we're all about development. No, they've got to have meat on the bones. They've got to have structure and programs in place to actually drive it. And there are some elements of development. Oftentimes companies will say, yeah, we'll develop you. We'll send you to a conference. We'll send you to a seminar once a year. You'll have fun. It's in Florida, right? That's not enough. That's not nearly enough. If you're looking for companies who are good at development, they have certain elements in place, okay? The first one is great performance management. They believe and they have structure for continuous feedback. Continuous feedback that's also very frequently documented. If it's not documented, as far as I'm concerned, it didn't happen. Not the deep stuff. Sure, good job, that's fine, don't document that. But when you're really helping someone develop on their performance, you've got to have good performance management. Good customer feedback, 360. If you're a mid-level manager in a company and you want to move up, you should be getting feedback from your manager, from your direct reports, from your peers within your function, and your peers that you collaborate with outside of your function. 360, okay? That's critical, performance management. Second piece is they should take real interest in your career. What do you want to do with your career? They should be asking, what do you want to do short term, next 5 years? They should be asking, what do you want to do 10 years from now? And it should not be title. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me, I want your job as CEO, I'd be retired by now. Think about what kind of work you want to do. Because if you focus on a title, you're limiting yourself. If you lock in on a title, there could be 10 titles that still incorporate the kind of work you want to do. That's what's important. Okay? Great work plan. Great work plan with good goals, good milestones. A lot of companies actually get that done pretty well nowadays. They do that pretty well. But you have to have a development plan. And that development plan should have all the discipline and all the structure of a work goal. And a lot of companies miss out on that. You've got to have that discipline, or else it's spotty. You can have a manager who informally does a great job of developing you just because they're passionate about it. But then you have another manager, because there's no structure, they have nothing to answer to. Spotty. The companies that have for decades produced the top management talent in the world, almost without exception, have these kinds of things in place. So look for that. It's not about what you can control, it's about what you can impact. You know, at Grande, I've never had direct control over anything except finance, accounting, and IT during the time I was there until I became CEO, of course. And yet, I honestly can say that just about every area of the company has my fingerprints on it. Because something would come up, there would be a business need, and we'd step up and say, yeah, we can do that. We'll do it. Doesn't matter if it's in our area of control or not. Okay? For those finance people, don't consider yourself a finance person. This is one of my quotes when we hire people. When I was CFO, we don't hire finance people. We hire business people who happen to understand finance extremely well. That's important. At Grande, finance has more people who have crossed over into other functions than any other function in the company, because they're business people. Okay? Every career choice is also a personal choice. Remember, I mentioned that earlier. Be sure that the two reconcile. You know, when I'm coaching people, especially people earlier in their careers, I always mention, this is one of my favorite quotes: there are no bad choices in life except those you refuse to live with. If you make your choice, then live with it. And we have that, especially in career guidance. Some people will say, well, I want to be CEO, but I want to come in at 8 and leave at 5. Guess what? That probably doesn't work. I can tell you now, it's not an 8 to 5 job. So that's okay. Make the choice. And there's no wrong choice, just so long as, you know, you continue to want to be CEO and think you're going to work 8 to 5. Okay? And again, recognize those seminal moments for what they are when they come. You won't always know it. I didn't know all of those. Some I did, some I didn't. But the more you know those and you incorporate that and give it the seriousness that it deserves when you're making those decisions and those moments, you have a lot better chance of getting to where you want to be. Don't sidestep your way into a career. Appreciate those moments. Make those decisions. With that, I'll open it up to any questions. And I'm going to get a drink if you don't mind. Or have I tired you out?
You mentioned the strong cultures at Procter & Gamble as well as Grande. What do you think sets apart and is able to build and maintain that culture at those companies as opposed to other companies?
Probably a couple of things. Oh, sure. Okay, great point. So the question was, okay, these strong cultures at like a Procter & Gamble and a Grande, how do they keep it strong? Great question, because it's not easy. It's real easy to get caught up in inertia and just let things slowly dribble away. You have to keep the culture, the key elements of the culture in front of people. You have to have ongoing programs that kind of support what the culture is all about, because you constantly have new people coming in. And if you're not constantly educating and defining what that is and helping people understand, sooner or later, you have half your population that's never been taught that, okay? The lady to my right here, Kelly Norton, she is our Senior Director of Enterprise Culture and Communications. So guess what a good part of her job is? Making sure those programs are in place, continuing to enrich the programs with which we reinforce the culture. Again, I can't emphasize enough, whether it's development or things like that, maybe it's because I've always been a finance person, I believe that you have to have structure and discipline around this stuff, because otherwise it falls apart way too easy. And so that's what those companies tend to do. Anything else?
So you've been in 2 chief officer roles at the same company. What was the hiring process like, and how are they different between both roles?
So 2 different chiefs, so the CFO and CEO?
Yes.
Okay, and what was my process like?
Yeah, what was the hiring process like for each role, and how are they different from each other?
Okay, sure. Since I was already an internal candidate, but when I got hired as CFO, I'd already been Director of Strategic Planning for 5 years. And so the hiring process for CFO was the CEO asked me to lunch and said, hey, how would you like to be CFO? And I said, gee, sure. Okay. And the hiring process for CEO, the chairman, my predecessor's CEO, and at that time I'm CFO, we're in a board meeting, and after the board meeting, everyone leaves, and the chairman asked me to stay behind. And he said, Todd, I have a question to ask you. And I said, well, sure, John, anything. And he said, would you like to be CEO? Gee, sure. Now, the recruiting process would have been very different, right? I mean, if it's easy to hire internally, and I'm a firm believer in hiring internally when you can. And so when we have, at Grande, when we have someone, a candidate, through our development program, the identification of career interests, and our succession planning, if we have somebody who's ready to fill a role, we don't open it up. That person's been prepping. They've been doing what they need to do. They've been talking about it. They've been developing for it. And if they're performing and they're kind of head and shoulders above other candidates, they get it. We're not gonna interview. We don't open it up for a free-for-all just because it's an open job. Now, it's different if you have a number of candidates that could equally compete for it, that are relatively close. You could do that. And we do that all the time too. But I always say management always reserves the right to hire somebody into the role as they see fit. Now, external hiring, totally different. Totally different. It's a multi-step process involving multiple visits and phone calls. And for an executive, we even send them to a professional behavioral psychologist who builds their behavioral profile to see if they'll fit our culture. We're that serious about it. The chairman and I laugh and say, thank God they never did it to us. We'd have never made it. Okay. But very different depending on internal versus external.
Are there any skills you find undergrads lacking frequently?
Undergrads lacking. I would say 2, okay, that I see the most. Writing. Really good, clear business writing, and frankly, just grammar. I hired, years ago when I was CFO, I hired somebody who was a close to 4.0 student out of the UW system, not here, but another fine UW school. Close to a 4.0. I had to send him to a tech school for remedial grammar, remedial English. Okay, so know your grammar, especially if you got a stickler like me that you're working for. Second thing is that the critical thinking that I've mentioned a few times, analytical skills. Anyone can do the numbers, crunch the numbers, and understand why the numbers say what they do, but then just horse sense, I'll call it, acumen. Step back and look at the numbers and say, that make sense? Is that intuitive? And so many times I find people coming right out, they do a great job of constructing the numbers and understanding the detail and how they were constructed. That's awesome. But then you say, yeah, but why does it look the way it does? And they say, well, that's because that's what the model spit out, and I know all about the model. Now, until you can tie back financial reporting or financial analytics to the business drivers that cause them, you really haven't done your management a whole lot of good. Okay, that's a big point of emphasis in our finance area.
Hunter said that back when you took the MBA, it was kind of like you had to do it to get to the next step. Where do you stand on MBAs now? And I've noticed that like they're starting to struggle to find people even to apply for MBAs, like when applications are down and stuff. Like, where would you recommend that for somebody who wants to achieve like an executive level at some point?
Yeah, good question. At that time, of course, 80s, early 90s, it was kind of, that was it, right? MBAs, 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 that kind of thing. I'm not a firm, I don't say, for instance, for hiring even an executive, my chief operating officer does not have an MBA. Now, he did his undergrad at Notre Dame, and he basically pursues economics on the side as a hobby and as a lifelong learner, and spent 25 years at Procter & Gamble. So you can do other things beyond getting an MBA. I always say getting an MBA isn't so much about getting 3 letters behind your name. You know, I've seen some MBA programs that, you know, they're not accredited and all this stuff, and I feel sorry for those people who get it because it's a waste of time. An MBA should represent your commitment to widening your horizons, widening your perspective, and continuing your learning process, that you're committed as a professional to developing yourself. That's what it represents. If you just take, that's why I'm actually not a big fan of students getting their MBA right after undergrad. I had 4 years. I had 4 years. A lot of the top programs will make you have 2 years of relevant experience before they even accept you now. At least from what I hear. I'm not as involved as I used to be, and I agree with that. It's if all you do is take more classes, no. You know, it should open new vistas for you, and you should, if you really get out of it what it's meant to be, you should be a little bit changed when you're done. I know I was. Does that help? Good.
Okay, Dean moving in, getting closer. Let's give Todd a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's just a little something, so I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
So we can continue the conversation. If you don't know, this is your first time here. We do have a reception following in the Hall of Nations, where Todd Koss and faculty and staff and other business people, I see Talent Connection Networkers have joined us, and of course we have the Board of Advisors, and we have faculty as well as yourselves. And I will tell you, the first drink, alcoholic or non, is on the Bensons from Benson Management. So let's give them another big round of applause for being our supporters. And I hope to see you here, if not back there right now. Back here the first Friday, the Benson Management first Friday in February. We're looking forward to another excellent presentation. So thank you for coming.